Hey Delaney, I wonder what the relationship between the First Nations and the government is.
Let's go explore the library. As we researched the First Nations library, we found several good information.
That's for sure. We discovered that each First Nation is typically represented by a band council and chaired by a chief.
Also, two or more could unite and form a tribal council.
That's interesting, but let's move on.
We should research a bit about the older times.
I've already found a book for us to research.
It says here that the government added a new restriction act in 1927.
That's interesting.
And the woman gets their rights taken away. The government of Canada offered a historical formal apology on July 11, 2008 to all former students of the residential schools and asked for their forgiveness for suffering they experienced and for the impact the schools had on Aboriginal cultures and heritages and languages.
My lord, that's super duper interesting.
Indeed. I've been talking so much. Let's let you have a whirl.
Well, I found that there were many different tribes, and they all had the same roles in government, and still do. The last book that I read had so much information. There were 614 bands in 2013.
And it says here that the newspaper, the federal government is pushing to get First Nations leader on board with the building of the oil pipelines in the West Coast.
Hey, isn't a band a government of natives?
You've got it!
Let's go find some new books. In this book, it says that each First Nation is typically represented by a band council and chaired by a chief.
In British Columbia Daily, it says that many bands in British Columbia control many Indian reserves, that is, multiple parcels of land.
And the biggest assembly of the First Nations, which represents the chiefs, over 600 bands, particular purposes, such as providing of social services or health care.
That's interesting. I wonder what happened in 1800s.
Let's find out in a book.
It says since the mid-1800s, government policies has dictated that First Nation women automatically lose their Indian status if they marry a non-Aboriginal man.
I found that in 1983, in response to First Nations demands for greater autonomy, the House of Commons
established a parliamentary committee, the Penner Committee,
to investigate
Aboriginal people.
Self-government.
Wow, I've never knew this would be so interesting.
Same here.
That was a long day of reading.
At least it paid off.
We found out the first
I found out that the First Nations have a pretty big role in our government.
And that they can have
And that they can have many rights taken away or given back to.
We almost learned too much.
You got that right. Goodbye.